I still remember what rat tastes like. Even now, 53 years later, I can close my eyes and feel that greasy, gamey meat sliding down my throat. Most nights I eat dinner with my wife, a good meal, pot roast or chicken, and sometimes I catch myself staring at the food thinking about those rats in Laos. She asks me what I'm thinking about and I just say nothing, honey. Because how do you explain to someone that you once fought another man over a dead rodent? How do you tell the woman you love that you know exactly what it feels like to be so hungry you'd eat anything that moved? 23 days. That's how long we were out there. 552 hours, give or take. I counted every single one of them because counting was the only thing that kept me sane. Counting and praying, though by the end I wasn't sure anyone was listening anymore. They say time heals all wounds. Well, whoever said that never spent 3 weeks behind enemy lines eating insects and drinking water that looked like chocolate milk. Some wounds don't heal. They just scar over. And every once in a while, something rips that scar right open again. I was 22 years old when they inserted us into Laos. Just a kid, really. Though I didn't feel like a kid anymore. None of us did. By the time you've been in country for 6 months, you've aged about 10 years. You see things, you do things, and a part of you dies even while the rest of you keeps breathing. That's just how it was. Let me back up a bit. You probably want to know how a farm boy from Nebraska ended up crawling through the jungle with a team of long-range reconnaissance patrol operators, eating rats and hiding from North Vietnamese army regulars. Well, it's not the kind of story that makes much sense, but then again, nothing about that war made much sense. I grew up outside of Lincoln. My daddy had 160 acres of corn and soybeans, and I spent my whole childhood assuming I'd take over the farm when he got too old to work it. That was the plan. Graduate high school, maybe take some agricultural classes at the community college, marry a local girl, have some kids, grow old watching the seasons change over those same fields my grandfather had plowed. The draft changed all that. I got my letter in the spring of 1968. I remember my mother crying at the kitchen table and my father just sitting there with his jaw set, not saying anything. He'd been in the Pacific during World War II, Guadalcanal and Okinawa, and I think he knew better than anyone what I was about to face. He never talked about his war, not once, and now I understand why. Some things are too heavy to put into words. Basic training at Fort Polk was brutal, but it was nothing compared to what came after. I tested well on aptitude, and they pulled me aside one day and asked if I wanted to volunteer for something special. They called it the Recondo School, Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol Training, LRRP, though we pronounced it LRP. They told me it was dangerous work, that the casualty rates were higher than regular infantry, but they also told me it was important. Small teams, 6 men, inserted deep into enemy territory to gather intelligence. Eyes and ears of the division, they said. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe I was too young and stupid to understand what I was signing up for. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself, or to my father, or to God. Maybe I just liked the idea of being part of something elite. Whatever the reason, I raised my hand, and that decision changed everything. The training was 3 weeks of pure hell. They ran us until we collapsed, then ran us some more. They taught us how to move silently through the jungle, how to set up ambushes, how to call in artillery and airstrikes. They taught us how to survive on almost nothing, how to read a map and a compass in total darkness, how to communicate with hand signals because a single spoken word could get you killed. They taught us that in LRRP you didn't fight unless you had to. Your job was to see without being seen, to report and disappear like ghosts. By the time I finished Recondo school, I thought I was ready for anything. I was wrong. Nobody is ever ready for what happens when everything goes sideways and you're 100 kilometers from friendly lines with no way to call for help. Our team leader was a staff sergeant named Wilson. I'm not going to use his full name
because I never got permission from his family. And even after all these years, I feel like I owe him that respect. Wilson was 31 years old, which made him ancient by our standards.
He'd done 2 tours already, and he had this calm about him that made you feel like everything was going to be okay, even when you knew it probably wasn't. He was the kind of leader you'd follow into hell, which is exactly what we did. There was Kowalski, our point man. He was from Chicago, a skinny kid with quick eyes who could spot a tripwire from 20 feet away. There was Davis, our radio man, a big guy from Georgia who carried that heavy PRC 77 radio like it weighed nothing. There was Martinez, our rear security, a quiet guy from Texas who barely talked but never missed a thing. And there was Thompson, the assistant team leader, a corporal from California who was always cracking jokes to keep our spirits up. 6 men. That was our whole world out there. 6 men against whatever the jungle and the enemy could throw at us. The mission briefing came in November of 1968. I remember it was raining, that constant monsoon drizzle that soaked through everything and never seemed to stop. The intelligence officer pulled down a map of Laos, and my stomach dropped. Laos. We all knew what that meant. Officially, we weren't supposed to be there. The war in Laos was secret, a whole other conflict that the American public didn't know about. But the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through Laos, and that trail was the artery that kept the North Vietnamese forces supplied. If we wanted to understand enemy movements, we had to go where the enemy was. The target was a suspected NVA staging area about 30 kilometers inside Laos. Our mission was to observe and report, find out how many troops were moving through, what kind of supplies they were carrying, where they were going. Get in, spend 4 days watching, get out. Simple on paper. Nothing about that mission was simple. The insertion happened at dusk. A Huey dropped us in a small clearing on a ridge, and I swear we were on the ground for maybe 30 seconds before the helicopter was gone, the sound of its rotors fading into the distance until there was nothing but jungle noise. That's a feeling I'll never forget. That moment when the bird leaves and you realize you're completely alone, that the next friendly face you see will be 4 days from now if everything goes according to plan. Everything did not go according to plan. We moved through the night, slow and careful, stopping every few hundred meters to listen. The jungle at night is not quiet. It's full of sounds, insects and animals, and the wind moving through the canopy, and your job is to separate those normal sounds from the sounds that mean danger. A snapping twig, a voice carried on the breeze, the metallic click of a weapon. You learn to hear everything, and that hyper-awareness never really leaves you. Even now I can be sitting in my living room and hear a car door close down the street, and my heart rate spikes, just for a second. Just enough to remind me that part of my brain is still back there, still listening. By dawn we'd covered about 8 kilometers. We found a hide site on a small hill with good cover and settled in to rest. That's how it worked in LRRP. Move at night, hide during the day, never stay in one place too long. We ate cold rations because the smell of cooking could carry for hundreds of meters. We whispered when we had to communicate at all. We took turns sleeping, 2 hours at a time, while the rest kept watch. The second night we moved another 6 kilometers and reached our observation point. From our position on a ridgeline, we could see down into a valley where the trail ran, and what we saw made my blood run cold. The intelligence had underestimated enemy strength, badly. This wasn't a staging area. This was a major supply hub. I counted over 200 NVA soldiers in the first hour of observation, and trucks kept coming and going all night, their headlights winding through the darkness like a snake made of light. There were anti-aircraft positions, supply dumps, even what looked like a field hospital. This was big. This was the kind of intelligence that could change the course of operations in our entire area. Davis got on the radio to report our findings. And that's when everything fell apart. I don't know if it was bad luck or if the enemy had somehow detected our radio transmission. What I know is that at approximately 0300 hours on our third night in Laos, we heard movement below our position. A lot of movement. Wilson signaled us to freeze, and we lay there in the dark, barely breathing, while flashlight beams swept the jungle below us. They were searching. Systematically, methodically, working their way up the ridgeline toward our position. Maybe they'd heard something. Maybe they'd detected our radio signal. Maybe a villager had spotted us and reported our position. It didn't matter how they knew. What mattered was that they knew. Wilson made a decision. We had to move immediately, and we had to move quiet. He signaled the extraction route, an alternate path we'd identified during planning that would take us north toward a secondary landing zone. We started moving, and for about 10 minutes I thought we might make it. Then Thompson stepped on something. I don't know if it was a landmine or a booby trap or just a twig that snapped louder than it should have. What I remember is the sound, a crack that echoed through the night like a gunshot, and then everything happened at once. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, the crack of AK-47 rounds passing over our heads, shouting in Vietnamese, and Davis, our radio man, going down hard with a sound I still hear in my nightmares. Wilson was yelling for us to run. Martinez was returning fire, covering our retreat. I grabbed Davis and started dragging him, not knowing if he was alive or dead, just knowing I couldn't leave him. Kowalski was on point, crashing through the jungle now, no time for stealth anymore, just speed. Thompson was behind me, helping with Davis, and I could hear Martinez's rifle going silent, which meant he was either out of ammunition or dead. We ran for maybe 100 meters before Wilson called a halt. We needed to assess, to figure out what was happening. And that's when I looked at Davis and realized two things. First, he was alive, but barely. A round had caught him in the shoulder, bad but survivable if we could get him to a medic. Second, the radio on his back had taken at least 3 rounds. It was destroyed, completely, irreparably destroyed. That radio was our lifeline. It was our only way to call for extraction, to report our position, to let anyone know where we were. Without it, we were ghosts. We didn't exist. No one was coming to rescue us because no one knew we needed rescuing. Wilson took a long moment to look at that shattered radio. I could see him working through the problem in his head, calculating our options, and I could see the exact moment when he realized how bad things were. But he didn't panic. He never panicked. He just looked at each of us, nodded once, and said the words that would define the next 3 weeks of our lives. We're walking out, 30 kilometers through enemy territory, carrying a wounded man with hundreds of NVA soldiers actively searching for us. It was insane. It was suicide. It was the only option we had. Martinez never caught up with us. I don't know what happened to him. Maybe he was killed covering our retreat. Maybe he was captured. Maybe he's still out there somewhere, bones scattered in the jungle, waiting to be found. I've looked for his name on the wall in Washington. I've searched records. He's listed as MIA, missing in action, which means his family never got closure, never got a body to bury, never got to say goodbye. That eats at me more than almost anything else from those days. He died saving us, and I couldn't even bring his body home. So now we were 5. Wilson, Kowalski, Thompson, Davis, and me. Davis was in bad shape, drifting in and out of consciousness, and we had to carry him. We took turns, 2 men supporting him while the others kept watch. It slowed us down terribly, but leaving him behind was never an option. That's not how LRRP worked. That's not how we worked. The first few days were the worst because we were still in the thick of the search area. NVA patrols were everywhere, and we had to move like shadows, freezing whenever we heard anything, sometimes lying still for hours while enemy soldiers walked within meters of our position. I remember one time, the 3rd day I think, When a patrol stopped to rest, maybe 20 feet from where I was hidden under a bush, I could see their boots, could hear them talking and laughing, could smell their cigarette smoke. I barely breathed. I thought about all the things I'd never done, never gotten married, never had kids, never told my father I understood why he never talked about his war. I prayed in my head, not real words, just a feeling, a desperate hope that they wouldn't look too closely at that bush. They moved on after about 30 minutes. I lay there for another hour before Wilson signaled it was safe to move. We were running out of food by day 4. LRRP rations were designed for short missions, and we'd already consumed most of what we carried. Water was a different problem. It was monsoon season, so water was everywhere, but clean water was another story. We drank from streams and puddles, straining it through our shirts, hoping we wouldn't get sick. Some of us did anyway. By the second week, I had dysentery so bad I was leaving a trail of bloody stool everywhere I went. Thompson had some kind of jungle rot on his feet that made every step agony. Davis's wound was getting infected, turning colors I'd never seen human flesh turn, smelling like something dead. But the hunger was the worst. You don't know what hunger really is until you've experienced it. I'm not talking about skipping lunch or fasting for a day. I'm talking about your body starting to consume itself, your muscles wasting away, your mind getting foggy and slow. I'm talking about cramps so bad you curl into a ball and cry. I'm talking about looking at anything, absolutely anything, and wondering if you can eat it. By day 7, we were eating insects, grubs pulled from rotting logs, beetles, ants, anything with protein. You crush them up so you don't have to feel them moving in your mouth, and you try not to think about what you're doing. You just chew and swallow and tell yourself it's keeping you alive. By day 10, we ate our first rat. Kowalski caught it with his bare hands, fast as a striking snake, and Wilson cut its throat with his knife. We didn't cook it, couldn't risk a fire. We ate it raw, splitting the meat between the 5 of us, and it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. That's not an exaggeration. When you're starving, a raw rat tastes like steak. Your body is so desperate for calories that it doesn't care about texture or taste or the knowledge that you're eating a rodent that probably had diseases. It just wants fuel. After that, rats became our primary food source. We got good at catching them, learned to find their trails, and set simple traps. Some nights we caught 2 or 3, and those were good nights. Some nights we caught nothing, and those nights were harder. I think about those rats a lot. I think about how quickly civilization stripped away from us, how fast we went from soldiers to animals. In the real world, the world I'd left behind, eating a rat would have been unthinkable. In the jungle, it was survival. It was all that mattered. And I learned something about myself out there, something I'm not entirely proud of. I learned that I would do almost anything to stay alive, almost anything. The jungle itself was trying to kill us in 100 different ways. There were leeches that found every inch of exposed skin and some inches that weren't exposed. There were mosquitoes that carried malaria and other diseases. There were snakes, some of them deadly venomous, and we had no antivenom. There was the rain, constant and relentless, that kept us soaked and cold at night. There was the mud, thick and sucking, that swallowed your boots and made every step a battle. And there was the terrain, endless ridges and valleys, steep enough to kill you if you lost your footing. We moved slowly, maybe 2 or 3 kilometers on a good day, sometimes less than 1 on bad days. Davis was getting weaker, and his wound had turned gangrenous. The smell was terrible, a sweet rotting odor that attracted flies and turned my stomach. Wilson made a decision on day 12 that probably saved Davis's life and definitely haunted all of us afterward. He cut away the infected tissue with his knife, no anesthesia, no sterile conditions, just raw field surgery while the rest of us held Davis down, and he screamed into a rag stuffed in his mouth. I don't know how Wilson knew what to do. Maybe he'd seen it done before. Maybe he just guessed. But when he was finished, the wound looked cleaner, and the smell got a little better, and Davis started to rally. Slowly, but he rallied. The psychological toll was as bad as the physical toll. You don't sleep right when you're being hunted. Every sound becomes a threat. Every shadow might be an enemy. Your brain gets stuck in fight or flight mode, and it just stays there, hour after hour, day after day, until you feel like you're going crazy. I remember thinking at one point that maybe I was already dead, that this was hell, and I was condemned to walk through this jungle forever, hungry and scared and alone. But I wasn't alone. That was the only thing that kept me going. The 5 of us, we became closer than brothers. When you share that kind of suffering with someone, when you watch them eat raw rat and drink muddy water and keep putting one foot in front of the other even though everything in them wants to give up, you form a bond that nothing can break. I would have died for any of those men. I think they would have died for me. We talked sometimes when we felt safe enough, when we'd found a good hide site and the jungle was quiet. We talked about home, about the things we missed, hot showers, clean clothes, real food, a bed that wasn't wet and full of bugs. Thompson talked about his girlfriend, a girl named Sarah who was waiting for him in San Diego. He was going to marry her when he got home, he said. He was going to buy a little house by the beach and never leave California again. Kowalski talked about his mother's cooking pierogies and kielbasa and things I'd never heard of but sounded amazing. Wilson didn't talk much about himself, but once late at night he told us about his daughter. She was 3 years old and she'd never seen him. He'd been deployed before she was born and he hadn't been home since. He kept a picture of her in his pocket, a black and white snapshot that was so worn from handling you could barely make out the features, and sometimes I'd catch him staring at it with an expression that made my chest hurt. Those conversations were precious. They reminded us that there was another world out there, a world of love and warmth and safety, a world worth fighting to return to. They reminded us that we were still human, even when everything around us was trying to strip that humanity away. By day 17, we'd covered maybe 20 kilometers. We were still inside Laos, but we were getting closer to the border, closer to friendly territory. And then our luck ran out again. We walked into an NVA base camp. Just walked right into it, too exhausted and foggy to notice the signs. 1 minute we were pushing through dense jungle. The next minute we were in a clearing with thatched huts and cooking fires and soldiers staring at us with expressions of absolute shock. There was a moment of frozen silence, just a heartbeat where everyone was too surprised to react. And then Wilson opened fire and we were running again, crashing through the jungle, bullets snapping past our heads, shouts and chaos behind us. Thompson went down. I saw it happen. A burst of automatic fire caught him in the back and he just crumpled. No dramatic fall, no last words, just there 1 second and gone the next. I wanted to stop, wanted to go back, but Kowalski grabbed my arm and dragged me forward. "Nothing you can do," he yelled. Or maybe he whispered. I can't remember anymore. My memory of that moment is fractured, just images and sounds that don't quite connect. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. Then we crawled. Then we hid. There were only 4 of us now. Wilson, Kowalski, Davis, and me. Thompson was dead. Martinez was probably dead. Half our team gone. I don't have words for how that felt. Thompson had been cracking jokes the night before, talking about Sarah, making plans for after the war. And now he was gone. His body left behind in a clearing in Laos, maybe never to be recovered, never to go home. His family would get a telegram, missing in action, presumed dead, and they'd spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened, hoping maybe he was alive somewhere, a prisoner, anything but dead. I cried that night, not sobbing, just quiet tears running down my face while I lay in the mud and tried to sleep. I cried for Thompson and Martinez and for myself and for all the things I'd lost that could never be gotten back. Kowalski put his hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He understood. The last 6 days are a blur. We were so weak, so sick, so broken that I honestly don't know how we kept moving. Wilson's leadership was the only thing that got us through. Even when he was staggering, even when he was as depleted as the rest of us, he kept pushing us forward. One more step, he'd say. Just one more step. And somehow, impossibly, we'd take that step, and then another, and then another. We ate whatever we could find. Rats when we could catch them. Insects. Leaves that we knew weren't poisonous. We drank water that was more mud than water, that tasted like rot and decay. Our bodies were shutting down. I could feel it happening. My heart beating irregularly, my vision blurring, my thoughts coming slow and muddy. I weighed maybe 160 pounds when we inserted. I would later learn I weighed just under 100 pounds when we emerged. I'd lost a third of my body weight in 23 days. Day 22, we crossed the border back into South Vietnam. I didn't even realize it at first. There was no sign, no marker, just endless jungle that looked exactly the same on both sides. But Wilson had been navigating by map and compass the whole time, and he knew. He stopped and looked at us and said, "We're home, not safe yet, but home." We kept moving, kept putting one foot in front of the other, because that's all we knew how to do anymore. And then, on day 23, we stumbled onto a trail that looked maintained, and we followed it, too exhausted to care if it was enemy or friendly, too far gone to be cautious anymore. A patrol found us, American soldiers, regular infantry from the 101st Airborne, and I will never forget the looks on their faces when they saw us. We didn't look human anymore. We were skeletal, filthy, covered in sores and insect bites and our own waste. We stank so bad the soldiers stepped back when they got close. One of them, just a kid, couldn't have been more than 19, looked at me with something like horror in his eyes, and I remember thinking, that's what I used to look like. That's what normal looks like. I'd forgotten. They called in a helicopter and we were evacuated to a field hospital. I don't remember much after that. Fragments, doctors and nurses with worried expressions, IV lines pumping fluids into my depleted body, a chaplain who held my hand and prayed. Waking up in a real bed, clean sheets, and crying because I'd forgotten what that felt like. Davis survived. They had to amputate part of his arm because of the infection, but he lived. Kowalski made it. Wilson made it. 4 out of 6, 2/3 of the team walking out of that jungle. They told us later that the odds of survival in a situation like ours were virtually zero. They called us lucky. Lucky. I've thought about that word a lot over the years. I don't feel lucky. I feel guilty. Why did I survive when Thompson didn't? Why did Martinez have to die covering our retreat? What made me special? Nothing. The answer is nothing. It was random. It was chance. A bullet that went left instead of right. A step that landed on solid ground instead of a tripwire. Nothing more. They sent me home after that. Medical discharge. Too physically damaged to continue serving, they said. I weighed 89 pounds when I landed at Travis Air Force Base. My mother screamed when she saw me. My father just held me, didn't say anything, just held me for a long time while I shook in his arms. I spent 6 months in a VA hospital recovering. Physically, I healed, put the weight back on, regained my strength. But inside, something was broken that never quite got fixed. I had nightmares for years, decades. I still have them sometimes. I'd wake up screaming, thinking I was back in the jungle, smelling the rot of Davis's wound, hearing the crack of Thompson falling. My wife learned to wake me gently, to speak softly and remind me where I was. She saved me in ways she'll never fully understand. For 40 years, I didn't talk about Laos. Not to my wife, not to my kids, not to anyone. The operation was classified, and even after it was declassified, I couldn't bring myself to speak the words. It was like if I didn't say it, it hadn't really happened.